This is John for Global Traveler. This morning, I have the pleasure of talking travel with journalist, news anchor, pilot, Stefan Holt. How are you, sir?
John, doing well. How are you? Good to see you.
I am good. It's a kind of a nice Chicago morning. I'm talking to a fellow Chicagoan. Let's jump right in. I want to
Absolutely.
talk to you about piloting, travel, all that. Give me a little bit of your background. I know you're obviously a news anchor. How did you decide you wanted to be that?
It's funny, aviation and journalism run in my bloodstream. So my dad, of course, is a news anchor and worked here in Chicago for many years. He worked in New York and Los Angeles, was most recently the anchor of NBC Nightly News, and is now working with Dateline. So I kind of grew up around TV stations and newsrooms my entire life. And then my mom was a flight attendant, so she flew for United Airlines for a number of years. She left the airlines shortly after I was born, but she would always tell me stories about traveling and being with the passengers and the crews all over the world and flying. And she saw a lot of the ups and downs of the industry during deregulation. So, from an early age, I had a love for travel. I had a love for telling stories. And it was kind of this balance of the two throughout my early childhood. I mean, we traveled a lot as a family, going all over the country and all over the world. And then, when I got to college, I kind of was at this point of, well, do I want to study politics? Do I want to study journalism? Do I want to study flying? So I ended up going to school with I went to Pepperdine University with a double major in broadcast journalism and political science. And then the summer after my freshman year, I went to flight school and became a private pilot and immediately got the bug. And for now, it's a hobby. It's something maybe, down the line there's some other professional aspirations as a flight instructor that could work out to balance my TV career. But it's been fun. It's a fun thing to do on the side. And then with journalism and storytelling, I get to use some of that aviation background whenever there's an airline or aviation incident or some sort of news report.
Now, obviously, your dad's a famous news anchor, newsman. Pluses and minuses. How were you able to navigate that course? Obviously, you've carved out your own career, there's no doubt. But how were you able to kind of maneuver through that?
I count myself very fortunate because I remember in high school being at Studio 1A in Rockefeller Center, just hanging out with my dad, just being able to be there and just absorb everything. And that was a great education because I could see how quickly a broadcast or a newscast that was well planned and well thought out could immediately turn on a dime because of breaking news or something that changed. And I kind of got fired up by that. I mean, there's that adrenaline rush of, okay, the camera's on, you're live, you got to perform, you got to do your thing. But then also just the enormity of covering the news when there's tragedy, there's a human toll to things. You're there when news is breaking and you get to absorb this with your own eyes. And so I think getting that perspective early on was really helpful for me. And also just having my dad to critique my performance. I'd send him little clips and like, hey, what do you think of this? And he's great because he's always very, very thoughtful and sensitive. He doesn't want to put me down, but also will say, hey, you need to work on this. This is something that you could do better. So he's been my greatest friend and ally and advocate, and we talk shop a lot. But I also think it's one of those, to your point, I really wanted to carve out my own path and do things my way. And I've been very fortunate that I've had an awesome career so far. I worked in Florida for a couple of years in an ABC station. I was with NBC in Chicago, New York, and then back to Chicago. So it's been a fun ride.
Well, we're happy to have you back in Chicago. We like you here. You're a pilot. You're a private pilot. You fly a Cessna 172. Could you
That's
explain a
right.
little bit, like you want to fly out to New York, you want to go back and see some friends there. What is the procedure? Who do you have to call? How do you have to work that out?
It's a great question. And for the kind of flying that I do, it's less of the long distance travel to New York. Mostly if I'm flying with my family, we're flying the airlines. And part of that is just for reliability and safety. As a private pilot, and trust me, there are a lot of people that own their own aircraft and they're able to make long distance flights. I don't own an airplane, so I rent, and most of the planes that I fly are in the training fleet. So they're used for, uh, you know, getting people started in flying, or maybe they're working on their instrument rating or their commercial rating. And if I'm taking the flight, all the way out to New York, which is several hours in a Cessna 172, that's time the airplane's not going to be used in the training environment. So,
I gotcha.
but eventually one day I would love to be able to do that because there's just a flexibility when you have your own aircraft. You can make decisions. Sure, you don't have to go through TSA and take your shoes off and magnetometers and things like that. But to answer your question, if you are flying your own aircraft, general aviation aircraft across the country, first and foremost, you got to think about safety. You have to think about how are you preparing yourself as a pilot for the flight to make sure that you're safe, that you're proficient in the aircraft, you've had your training, and that everything is ready to go in that sense. How are you feeling? Are you sick? Are you have some stress going on in life behind the scenes? Those are some of the factors that you have to really think if you want to make this trip. And the beauty is it's a go or no go decision that you make.
Right.
It's a lot of pressure on the pilot. The airlines, you have dispatchers and you have company to back you up. As a general aviation pilot, all that decision making falls on you. And then, other decisions you have to make in terms of the weather, trying to figure out, okay, if there's a storm front coming through, is the visibility going to be okay? Is this going to be a VFR, visual flight rules, or an instrument flight rules flight? And then, fuel considerations and all these other things. Again, it's a lot of pressure on the pilot to come up with these decisions. And that's what we're trained for. That's what we do all the time. So it's making those decisions in advance as much as possible. And then when things change, just like in TV, being ready to pivot and do the right thing to have a safe outcome.
So when you're flying, you've got all that obviously a lot of things in your mind. Like if I want to get away from something, sometimes I'll just go for a drive and just enjoy the scenery, enjoy the ride. When you're flying your plane, whether it's by yourself, with family, whoever, are you able to kind of sometimes during the flight just kind of sit back and enjoy the view, enjoy the ride?
I think there is a level of that, and almost like going for a drive. It's something about being up in the air, and sure, you have all these considerations on your mind of air traffic control, and how's the airplane performing. But then I do get those moments of clarity, especially at cruise altitude when I'm flying over the cornfields in central Illinois. See the windmills down below, and it's a beautiful blue sky day. And I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And the cool thing too is, for me being in the public eye and being television, it's a chance to just be I'm free. I'm up in the air. I've heard a lot of pilots say, "Hey, you're just a tail number. You're just, among the people that love being up there in the sky, and there's something special about it. And it is, I think, a way for me to de-stress. I know a lot of people look up in the cockpit and say, how can that be? How can you de-stress with all that going on? But I think after a while, you do get this level of tranquility and the sense of awe and amazement that we're able to do this. And we're very fortunate in the United States that we have a robust general aviation system that people have the ability and the freedom to go take an airplane, go fly.
So you've posted, this is what really fascinates me. You posted on Instagram some really cool, your whole Instagram is really cool. But the thing that really caught my eye, you started talking about Chicago sports personalities in flight patterns. I kind of got lost in a little bit on the terminology. Could you run through that pretty, like a little bit of what all that was?
Absolutely. So, and this is at airports all across the country. When we fly, we have navigation charts that are used, of course, by the pilots and the flight crews, but also by the FAA and the air traffic controllers. And these are waypoints. We call them fixes. It's a way to help airplanes, almost like highways in the sky. They go to these different fixes and points along their route. Some of them are part of departure procedures going out of the airport. Some are arrival procedures. Some are instrument approaches. And a lot of these waypoints, some of them just have random names, it's just a bunch of letters, sewn together. But if you look closely, a lot of them start to think, oh, for example, there's one called Hulls in Chicago. I was like, oh, Bobby Hull, who played for the Blackhawks.
Sure.
There's Bears. There's a lot of these. I think I did the one on the Chicago Bears and the '85 Bears. There's
Yeah.
Walter and Peyton on one of the arrivals coming into Chicago. yeah, there's a lot of these sports references. Some of them are, I was looking closely, there's a Capone somewhere coming into Chicago, and some other references. And part of it is the FAA wants to reflect the local area. It's a nice little kind of Easter egg or a hat nod to some of the local culture and local landmarks. And I've been told they're all selected by the FAA employees at
Oh.
the local the center control, the air route traffic control center. So they like to do a little nod to the local flavor, and it's kind of cool to see those on the chart.
So they have those in other cities as well, like New York. You might have, Namath or something like that.
Yeah, in Cleveland, this is a great one. They have it's the Pink Floyd. I think it's an arrival. They have a couple other ones that are related to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland. My favorite there's an arrival into LaGuardia. It's the I think they call it the it used to be the expressway visual. I think it's now the park visual approach. But all of them are references to the New York Mets. There's
Oh,
Shea for Shea Stadium, which, rest in peace, is no longer
sure,
there. And there's a couple other ones. I'm trying to think of. I think there's one in the Bay Area for Meta. Facebook, Meta's headquarters is
sure.
right there in the Bay Area. So there's a lot of these all over the country. You just look closely at the chart, and they stand out to you.
Could the average person find these things somewhere? Is there like a site which would have them?
There's a couple websites that have FAA charts, and it might be a little hard to decipher for people who aren't familiar with aviation terminology and how to read the charts. I'm sure if you Google it, you'll see some posts that are on there about all the different arrivals and departures that have fun little Easter eggs to them. And that's how I found a lot of them at first. And it's funny, I posted the video, and the comment section was filled with lines from other pilots like, "Hey, do this one. Have you seen this one?" And
Well, I'm
it's
not a
kind of a
pilot. I was
fun
one
little
of the
thing.
comments, so I certainly the first one you posted, I was hooked already, man. I just thought it was really like that kind of stuff is really cool to me, you know.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'll find some more. I'll have to do another one.
Now, in one of the interviews I read, you talked about you want to cover go across the seas or somewhere foreign to cover stories in the history of society. What let's jump into the time machine. What story, where would you have liked to cover?
Wow, that's a great question. Throughout history, I'm partial to. I've always been fascinated with the Cold War. And so I think covering that story through my grandfather was in Vietnam and told me a lot of stories. He was in the Air Force stationed at Da Nang. And so and that's another place that I've always wanted to travel to. So I think some of the idea of being a war correspondent has always been um, somewhat attractive to me. And people are, it's war, it's violent, it's dangerous. There is something important about covering conflict and covering war, not just from the big 35,000-foot view, but from being on the ground,
Right.
talking to the people that are the combatants, but also the peoples whose lives have been upended by that conflict. So I've always had an immense respect for war correspondence, and that was kind of my goal for a while, because I knew it involved travel, I knew it involved matters of huge importance and breaking news and points where you really need clarity. And what happened is I actually ended up having some conversations with other correspondents, people that traveled abroad. I was actually an intern at NBC News in London, and I started to realize how hard it is to be a father and a husband when you're doing that kind of life and that sort of work. And now that I have three kids and a wife, and we're settled out here in the suburbs, it's nice to be able to know, okay, I'm going to do the 10 o'clock news, and I'm able to get home. I'm not
Sure.
going to be flying to Ukraine or flying to Latin America right now. So that there's something nice about that. But I still kind of look back and think, oh, that would be really really cool to do.
Gotcha. So other than that, just in your personal life, where's a few destinations you maybe haven't been where you'd like to go?
So I mentioned Vietnam. That's somewhere I've always wanted to go. I've heard great things about. I don't know, just the people and the food, and I think also being there, considering that this was a place that we, went to war.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. I've been all over the world. I've been to I've been to Normandy and to the beaches in France there that the Allies landed in 1944, and I've always been fascinated by war history. So I'd love to see more of the battlefields in France, even just here at home. I mean, just going to the Civil War battle sites is on my bucket list. And then, that's kind of the history and the kind of the passion that I have for history and politics. But I think there's also so many parts of Africa that I'd like to see. I've always wanted to go to Victoria Falls. I see the pictures and videos, and it's just stunning. So there's a lot of Africa that I'd like to see. Cape Town, I'd like to go on a safari. All things that are on the bucket list. And like I said, I have a wife and three kids and a busy job, so
Makes
it's
it a little hard.
someday.
Is there any place you've been that really surprised you, hopefully for the good, but just kind of wow, I didn't expect this.
I was really surprised when I traveled to Cuba, and that was so funny story about that trip. That was a work trip. I was working at Channel 4 in New York, WNBC, and I was a reporter and anchor. I was trying to cover more of the aviation beat while I was down there, and JetBlue was starting their first flight from New York to Havana. It was the first commercial flight between the two cities in over half a century. So I said, "Hey, would it be possible that I could cover this inaugural flight and go on the flight with you guys?" And they said, "Yeah, sure. We're having some journalists and reporters on there and some dignitaries." So I was able to work with them to get a visa to go to Cuba. And I want to say it was maybe 2 days before the flight was supposed to take off. All of a sudden, the Cuban government announced that Fidel Castro had died, and there
Oh,
were going to be several days of mourning. And this was a huge story. And I think of the importance of Fidel Castro and the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Cold War.
sure.
So I called my assignment manager, and she said, "Just get to the airport, go." And I literally went to LaGuardia, got on a flight to Miami, and then had to figure out how to get to Havana. And they were running charter flights back then between Miami and Havana, and I was able to get a ticket and started covering this huge story in history. And that was a really sobering moment to be there because I think I want to go back because I was there during this period of mourning and I was working. There was a lot of press conferences and rallies and things like that that we were covering, and I didn't really get to experience the food and the culture. I mean, I love Afro-Cuban jazz. Being able to walk down the streets and get a cigar or something like that. I wasn't able to do a lot of those things,
Good.
so that's definitely on my list of things that I'd like to do again. But I think just being there for that historic moment and interesting. I was just reflecting this week because I heard Nicolas Maduro speak while I was there. He gave one
Wow.
of the eulogies. So yeah, I think that's one of the neat things about being a journalist is you get a front row seat for history and you're able to absorb all that information and then tell the story to the world. And it's a privilege. It's one that I'm very humbled and respectful of. And I think it's one of those that I've been fortunate in stories like that to be there at those historic moments.
So as someone who grew up in Chicago, who's back in Chicago, what are some of your favorite things to do or spots to see or places to recommend? Be it restaurants, be it attractions, whatever.
How much time do we have? Because I
I got
the
all
list
day.
goes on and on. The funny thing, I'm always so you talked about what places that surprise you, and I'm always surprised whenever I go to different neighborhoods in Chicago, how much they change and how much they stay the same. So I grew up at the North Side in Lincoln Park, and it's funny when I go back, there's certain areas that just are totally transformed.
Yep.
And then, there's the restaurant I used to go to when I was a kid. It's funny. I try to go to new places as much as possible. So, when we go out to dinner in the city, I love going to, Fulton Market area. There's a lot of great restaurants around there, the South Loop. Um, Trying to get to the north side a little bit more and just where we are in the expressways is easier to be on the west side or downtown. But trying to think what's a good place that I've been to recently. Man, we had a great dinner at it's a Filipino restaurant called Kasama and went there for I think it was for our anniversary dinner. It was really, really good. Really, really enjoyed that. So again, we like exploring, trying new places. Of course, I'm partial to deep dish pizza and to tavern style pizza, and yeah, I'm usually getting the Portillo's on my dinner break. Chicago has just such a great food scene. There's so many awesome restaurants. You can get everything from just a quick casual meal to fine dining where you're sitting down and enjoying just a Michelin star meal. So I think that's what I love about it. And it's funny when I talk to people who come to Chicago, they're surprised by that. And I'm used to it. I've only known Chicago, so I'm like, why is this surprising to you? This is such a great city. But they come here and they think, oh, it's got a lot of what New York has to offer and has the entertainment, and I think it's if it's the best kept secret, then I'm cool with that because it's more for us to enjoy. But I'm also a big proponent of telling people, hey, come to Chicago, check it out, you'll enjoy it.
Exactly. You kind of beat me a little bit to the question. I was going to ask you deep dish or thin crust in Chicago because that's a big question. But for you, I also have to throw in New York style. So,
Oh man. So here's my theory. It's a different experience. Chicago pizza it's a meal to be shared. So you go to a restaurant, it takes a while for them to make the deep dish pizza. You have maybe a pitcher of beer, or you have a drink with your friends, or the salad. It's this kind of communal experience, and then they bring out the pizza, and everybody just has this meal together. New York, I love New York style pizza, and I've always thought of it as this is the meal where you're on your quick lunch break, you grab a slice, and you get back to work. It's a little bit more, and now it can be a communal experience as well, and I'm sure there's people that would beg to differ on that. But and trust me, I love just being in New York, going to visit my parents, and like, hey, let me go grab a slice over there at Joe's, and it's a great lunch. Um, I think it's just a different experience, and I, I I'm hesitant to say one is better than the other, but I think at the moment, at this stage in my life, being with friends, being with family, that's important to me. And there's nothing better than just sharing a meal, breaking bread, or breaking open a slice of pizza.
I love that explanation. I've asked that question to a lot of people, and that's the first time I've heard that. And I actually like the way that, and as you were saying that, I was picturing myself doing that, and I think it's a perfect explanation. I think it's fantastic. Are you a big sports fan at all?
I am a sports fan. Big fan of the Bears. Really excited about this weekend. Excited about the playoffs. Excited what Ben Johnson has done with the team. I'm fired up by it. Now, the only hard part with that is my wife is a Packers fan. She
Oh,
is a
oh, how did
diehard
that
Packers fan.
happen?
She has a good reason. So my wife grew up in Central Texas, and people are like, how is she a Packers fan if she's from Texas? And the reason why she became a Packers fan, her grandfather was in the NFL. He played for the Packers back in the late 50s.
Really?
And his name is Bobby Dillon. He's now in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Well,
And
yeah.
he led the Packers in interceptions. And I think his record still stands to this day. Just an incredible guy. And I actually had the pleasure of getting to know him while he was still alive, and just a kind gentleman and a great guy, and loved talking about football. So, her being a Packers fan and me being a Bears fan was already kind of a relationship that
That's
had its
understandable.
challenges.
Yeah, but it's still, and now I understand why, certainly why she's a Packers fan. And
Yeah.
one way or the other, one of you is going to win this Saturday. So
Yeah. One of us going to win. And, I think either way it works out, we'll be happy here in this household. At least I'll pretend to be happy if it's the other way. But
well, hopefully you'll be the happy one. No offense to the missus.
I
Have you,
agree.
have you ever thought of writing a book? Is that something possibly in your future?
I've thought about it. That's funny, and I always wonder what to write about. I look at so many of my friends and professional colleagues that have written books, and it seems like it's come so natural. And I've kind of struggled because I do love nonfiction, but part of me's wanted to write kind of an aviation thriller book, or a journalism thriller book. Um, I don't know. I'll get back to you on that one. That is on
Okay,
the bucket list, and I think writing is one of those ways that I write for a living. We write the newscasts and stories every day, but there is something kind of therapeutic about just putting pen to paper, or typing out a story. And I've always enjoyed a lot of those political thrillers, the Tom Clancy books.
sure.
David Baldacci and a lot of those. So, we'll see. I've got a lot on my plate right now, but I think that would be a fun process to work on.
Or either the aviation thriller, I'd be all over that, or autobiography would be cool too. But I really appreciate your time. Before I let you go, would you like to tell everybody where they can find more information about you, maybe your social medias?
Absolutely. Well, you can find me on the NBC 5 News in Chicago. I anchor the 5, 6, and 10 o'clock news. And then I'm also on Instagram a lot at Steph Holt NBC. I'm also on TikTok. And I'm on Facebook a little bit, but I'm mostly on Instagram and TikTok, so you can find me there. And yes, it's a lot of aviation stuff. Some things about the news, some things behind the scenes around the station, but I try to find some of those interesting aviation related news stories. And the idea is to be fun with it, is I think to share some of the lighter side of aviation. We do talk about the serious stuff as well, but also make people feel comfortable about flying. It's one of those mysteries for a lot of folks, and I think my idea is to educate and to inform and to inspire folks about how great aviation can be.
Well, you certainly are accomplishing that. I've been recommending your Instagram to friends, and everybody that comes back to me says, "Oh, I love that stuff. I love the flight patterns, all the information you're giving, and like you said, you deliver it in an entertaining way. It's not just throwing a bunch of facts out there and rah rah flying. It's great. I really enjoy your Instagram, and I encourage everyone to check it out. Of course, if you're in the area, check him out on the news because he's one of the best coming up and coming news anchors out there. He's been around for a while, but he's still a young man with a lot of career ahead of him.
Thank you, John. It's very kind. Appreciate it.
Sir, I appreciate your time. I wish you luck and safe travels.
Absolutely. Safe travels. We'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.